But our next panel is about policy, and that's very important. Peggy is leaving from here and going over to the Hill to talk and work with the congressional staff. We know that policy is tremendously important in shaping the playing field for these technologies, from the FCC and the E-rate down to the teacher that says, well, because of the Internet Protection Act, I can't use mobile technology, or down to the district policy that bans the use of cell phones in schools, or some of the state policies that are restrictive about professional development. I know that at Harvard, under the former president, Larry Summers, we were prohibited from offering any course across distance for a Harvard degree program other than at the continuing education school. And now, under President Faust, we're part of edX. And HarvardX is looking at ways of reaching across distance and time. So policy is enormously important in shaping what's going on. And we're delighted to have this panel to help articulate that. So I want to invite Brian Lewis, the CEO of ISTE, to the stage, along with his fellow panelists. And Brian, I'm going to turn it over to you in terms of moderating this panel. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. Good morning, everybody. We've got a great panel here this morning. Come on up, guys and gals. We've got a great panel, and it's the chance for all of us to talk a little bit about the policy side of all this. And what we're going to do is I'm going to introduce the panelists in just a moment. We're going to give them each about 5 minutes to share some of their thoughts on the policy components from their unique perspective. And then we're going to have a little conversation up here. I'm going to incite some riot, hopefully, this morning with them. And then we're going to ask you to weigh in towards the later part of the hour with some of your questions. So I encourage you, as our panelists are talking, to make some notes of some of the questions you'd like to ask them. And we want to engage you in that. We'll have some mic runners around the room, and hopefully we'll have a vibrant conversation. So let me share with you who's with us this morning. Maribeth Luftglass is the Assistant Superintendent and CIO for Fairfax County Public Schools. She's responsible for information technology strategic planning, implementation, and support of all information systems throughout the district. Fairfax, as you may know, is the 11th largest district in the country, with 177,000 students, 239 schools and centers, and 133,000 computers. Fairfax consistently ranks well above state and national averages for student achievement. Welcome. John Miller is the Assistant Director, Office of Technology, Instructional Technology for West Virginia Department of Education. He's worked in the areas of instructional technology and online assessment at the department since 2008. He's responsible for overseeing all statewide broadband initiatives, the state E-rate program, a statewide technology integration specialist training program, and other initiatives related to supporting instructional technology and network infrastructure. Good morning. Richard Culatta is the Deputy Director, Office of Educational Technology for the U.S. Department of Education. His work with the department focuses on leveraging open data to create personalized learning experiences for all students and promoting increased connectivity to improve access to education and make college more affordable. He's a leader in the field of educational innovation with experience in K-12, higher ed, corporate, and government learning environments. A former Spanish teacher, Richard remains an advocate for bilingual education. And finally, Jon Bernstein is founder and president of the Bernstein Strategy Group here in D.C. He's been working on education technology, and telecommunications issues since 1995. He's a recognized expert on federal legislative and regulatory issues related to the E-rate program, education appropriations, and No Child Left Behind ESEA. Prior to launching Bernstein Strategy Group in 2005, Jon served as vice president at Leslie Harris and Associates, where he worked on K-12 education policy and appropriations issues, the E-rate program, and blocking filtering legislation. Good morning. Full disclosure, ISTE is a client of Jon's, so we just want to make that very transparent to the group as well. So first we're going to start with Maribeth and ask her to make a few comments.
Great, glad to be here. It sounds like it's been a wonderful conference. Just a little bit about Fairfax for anybody that doesn't know. We are about 10 miles from here in Virginia, Northern Virginia. As we said, it's a very large district, and we've been really focusing on mobile technology, and certainly in recent years in BYOD initiatives. So bring your own device is a big part of what our goal is. We have, on a typical average day, as we talked about, we have 130,000 of our own computers, but about 60,000 additionally we have about mobile devices we have on our network on a typical day. So it's definitely a trend in moving towards mobile devices and mobile technology. We're going to show you a little quick video clip of just typical school that we have that we're using BYOD. This is actually from last year, so we're continuing to expand that. So if we can run that quick BYOD video, that would be great.
BYOD is catching on throughout Fairfax County Public Schools. It means bring your own device, and for students, that translates to more learning opportunities.
I've used it to take notes in class. I put it on here. These are all the notes that I've taken.
I did my flashcards for Spanish, I do my math homework, and I watch PowerPoints for class.
Well, I'm a very good typer, and my handwriting is actually not very good, so that's why I prefer to type my assignments rather than write them out, because it's quicker and neater.
For teachers who venture into the world of modern technology, tablets, smartphones, and e-readers are taking class lessons in new directions, engaging students and focusing them on their assignments.
The project we're working on right now, they have been writing group skits to showcase conflict, and bringing in their own computers and bringing in other devices that they can pull the script up on at the same time allows them all to be working together.
One day we were doing vocabulary, and a student asked, can I use my smartphone to make flashcards? Because there's an app for that. And I said, oh, okay, that sounds interesting. And I let him do it, and now it's started to pick up throughout the room.
Students are also using their personal devices to complete homework assignments posted on the FCPS 24/7 Blackboard site.
Technology is such a part of this generation that it's kind of breaking down the barriers from what school is versus what home is. So they're able to now use it at home and in the classroom the same way. So they're not having to learn two ways of learning. So they're able to translate that and be more engaged with it because it's more their speed, it's more their language.
Supported by school-based technology specialists and technology support specialists, students register their devices with FCPS at their school and are permitted to use only the FCPS-approved Wi-Fi access point. That way, FCPS can filter content for each student connecting to the internet while on school grounds. And for students without personal devices, they're supported too.
No student at Rachel Carson will go without technology. Here we are providing all the technology that they need. We'll provide the laptop computers, access to the internet, everything that they need here. What we're hoping with the BYOD is that we just add to that number and increase, and also allow the students access to the items that they personally have that they want to use. So if they would rather use their iPad to access Blackboard, they can do that now.
I think it's a great thing. I do think that it's going to require teachers to kind of think outside the box as well, but the students love it, they're engaged with it.
What I try to encourage people is just to be open to change, open to new ideas, and not be afraid to learn from our students. I think our students have a lot that they can teach us, and you know, having a student show us an app or a cool new way to learn something makes them feel good, and you know, gives a lot back to the classroom and that teacher that they can then share with someone else.
BYOD, helping FCPS stay on the forefront of 21st century learning. For School Scene, I'm Jim Lepp.
Just gives you just some examples of how the kids are using their technology, and teachers are learning to embrace it. Certainly we've had, you know, to struggle through the policy aspects of this, from everything from the local acceptable use policies and making sure our kids, we're trying to have them register them. So I would say not all of those 60,000 devices have actually been registered. We're working on that, but the idea is to get the devices out from underneath the desks or in their pockets in the backpacks to on top of the desk and out in group projects. And so it's a lot of, you know, it's a change. It's a change for our teachers, and we really still keep it up to the individual teacher of what they allow, when they allow the devices to be used in their classroom. But we certainly are moving and encouraging more and more best practices to be shared with how the teachers can embrace the technology, embrace the different devices, make them more comfortable, and in making sure our parents are comfortable with it. One of the things that we're finding is that we actually, when we have some issues, we have had no issues of theft or those kind of things, which was a lot of the fear. When we've had some things lost, thanks to our Wi-Fi network and our operations center, we can actually identify somebody if they've registered the device. They can actually say, well, that device is actually in that mobile trailer in the back left corner, because we can see on the network where that device is, and they can instantly get it back. So a lot of things, it's actually more secure by having kids, having them out in the open and having them be registered in devices. Now there's certainly a few things that we challenge with. Obviously we're requiring them officially to use our filtered network because we have to, with obviously some of our federal regulations and that we have to. So now I can't say that they always do that, but we certainly have said as our part of our policy that they must do this. And so part of that we feel we have the obligation, so we don't want to risk our E-rate funding and other kind of things that by not having everything filtered. But I think there's a lot of opportunities to continue to ease some of those things that we have our schools more empowered to really take advantage of the latest and greatest technology and not necessarily have to be totally restricted to some of our filtering and some of those things that they're not going to have when they leave our building. So it's a little bit about what's happening in Fairfax to get started.
Great. Thank you, Maribeth. Let's go to the state level with John Miller from West Virginia Department of Education.
Okay. In West Virginia, our focus is and continues to be on implementing and expanding broadband access in our schools and moving towards the goal of one-to-one computing for every student. We have a statewide network in West Virginia, which means that the state is responsible for ensuring SIPA compliance, and that's certainly an important consideration. We're committed to the use of technology to make learning personal for students, and our ultimate goal is to have a student-centered, personalized learning landscape, which we envision as being device independent, where students can access their course material anytime, anywhere, and of course, home broadband access is also important when we think about anytime, anywhere learning. We just went through a policy revision in West Virginia, and to be honest, we didn't start out doing that with mobile learning in mind. The reason we started this policy revision is that our state board revised their goals. Their new goals are summed up in 3 words: know, behave, and accomplish. And what those mean is that we need to concisely convey to students what they need to know in order to meet their graduation requirements or pass their current course or move on to the next level. We also need to concisely convey to them how they need to behave, or student dispositions, expected student dispositions. And if we do that, we create an environment where they can accomplish and be career and college ready. And it was that second goal, behave, that led us to revise our expected student disposition or behavior policy. And it was in looking at that that we also realized that we needed to revise our acceptable use policies. Both of those had some language that was a little controlling of how students were expected to behave, especially in using their own devices in schools. And so we brought in our school districts to advise us on how to convey this, and we got a lot of mixed signals. Some schools viewed student-owned devices as something that should be banned, that it's a distraction. Students are texting in class. It's something that we need to put in policy that should not be allowed. Other districts viewed those student-owned devices as a way of expanding the classroom into the evenings or throughout the day after students leave that one teacher. They can converse and still work on coursework. And so at the state level, we wanted to put in policy guidance for schools to view mobile devices, whether it's district-owned or student-owned, as a way of expanding the classroom and utilizing those for anytime, anywhere learning. We have multiple one-to-one projects in West Virginia. Several of those utilize district-owned devices. Several also utilize bring your own device technology. When we looked at the bring your own device projects, we discovered that there's 2 key considerations. You can allow those devices on your network, or you can allow students to utilize the network that comes with that device. Our policy, because we're responsible for SIPA compliance, is to add those devices to our network, but to do it in a responsible and protected way. And there are technologies that allow you to add those devices to your network while still ensuring that students are logging on and that they're meeting SIPA compliance. There's also protective measures to allow those devices to utilize their own networks and still meet SIPA compliance, of course. But our policy is to add those devices to our network, not just to give out the wireless password so students can access the network, but to do it in a way that the devices are secured and they're kind of in a walled garden away from the other parts of the network. And so what we discovered is there's several, three important key considerations when revising policy. Do you want to allow students to bring their own devices in the first place? And in West Virginia, we do. And if so, will they connect to their own networks, or will you allow them on your network? And how will you manage those devices? And then we also found that it was extremely important to convey to our districts that devices, that there's no 100% foolproof way of ensuring SIPA compliance or ensuring that students are going to use the devices responsibly. So it's imperative that we teach student responsibility. We want schools to utilize social media. We have that in our policies now, that social media in itself isn't a bad thing, that it should be utilized. And we want to teach students how to utilize that in all access devices and online resources responsibly. So that's an important consideration. So careful planning and policy revisions can ensure that these types of implementations are successful.
Great. Thank you, John. Let's go to Richard from the U.S. Department of Education.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. I'm glad to be here and spend some time with you and hopefully hear some questions and join in the conversation. I'm also honored to be part of a panel with some really phenomenal leaders in this space. We have, on a personal note, I have 3 kiddos that are all in Fairfax County Public Schools, and you can tell the moment you walk into those buildings, you see the evidence of Maribeth's leadership and really some amazing things that are happening there. So good stuff. Unlike Maribeth, I don't have a cool video to show you. If I showed you the video of a day in the life at the Department of Ed, you'd probably all be sacked out on the desk. So I instead will try another approach. I want to tell you a story, something that makes you really excited about where we're going with mobile technology, and then also what keeps me up at night, other than checking my phone, which is sitting right next to the bed, as we saw on the poll. But I think it's a word that may be helpful as we as we shape this conversation. So the first thing is, the thing that makes me so excited about what we're doing as we move to mobile learning opportunities is the fact that it's the key to turning kids into creators. It helps empower them because it's giving them the real tools, the pro tools, right? They're using the same tools that the professionals that are doing what they're doing out in the quote-unquote real world are using. Right? My wife is a professional violinist. When my kids are in school learning about music, I want them using the same tools that she's using to compose and to create music, right? I want my kids using the same tools that professional writers are using to write and edit. And when we have mobile solutions that allow them to do that, it becomes very exciting and engaging in school. So that's the first thing, and that's what really makes me excited about what we're doing here. Let me tell you the other part. Actually, let me give you one really quick example of that. When I was in I went down to visit Mooresville, a graded school district, which some of you have heard of. You know, it's touted a lot, and you hear all kinds of great things. Every kid has a laptop, and they take them home. But let me tell you the thing that struck me when I was in Mooresville. I walked around, and as you heard, I used to be a classroom teacher, and so I spent time in the classroom. And as I went around, something was just different and weird, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And I was like, well, is it the fact that there's laptops all over the place? And that wasn't it. Well, what is it? What's this thing? After about the 3rd classroom, I realized I couldn't tell where the front of the room was. That was the thing that was weird. I couldn't tell. From different classrooms, different subjects, and in every one, I couldn't tell because there was no teacher standing in front of the room. There was no board with all the notes on it. The kids were sitting there working in projects around the room, and it was phenomenal. So that's the exciting part of it. Now, let me tell you the thing that keeps me awake at night. I worry that we can get in a place where we're simply layering technology on top of old teaching practices. Digitizing traditional ineffective teaching models does not help us move forward, right? And I worry about that. There is a digital divide in this country, and it's not about who has devices and who doesn't have devices. There were 2 articles that recently came out, one in New York Times, one in Daily Beast, that both talked about this digital divide. You know what they say the most important digital divide is? It's not about who has devices. It's about ability to reimagine learning through technology and not to be able to do that. Right? And that's a very serious digital divide that we have to work through. When I go in and I take a look at schools and they say, hey, what are you doing with technology? And you're saying, well, we've gotten rid of these terrible old things we used to call textbook, you know, those ink-stained dead trees that we don't like anymore because they're textbooks. I said, okay, good, you got rid of this. What have you done now? Well, now we have this iPad, and on this iPad, look at this, we have a PDF, and we can go through the textbook. And I go, seriously, you're excited about that? You're here telling me that you're excited because we've basically digitized something that wasn't effective on paper, and we think somehow because it's now in pixels, it's going to be more effective for learning? So we have to be very cautious when we think about our policies, and we'll have some chance to talk about how policies play into this, that our policies are helping reimagine learning. The best technology policy conversations I'm ever in are ones that don't start talking about technology. They start with a learning outcome, a culture change, and then at some point along the way, how technology can support it. And so I think that's the challenge that we all have as we look at making this shift from print to digital learning. Thanks.
Thank you. So as you were talking, I was thinking about a decade ago, I was serving on a local school board, and we were having the policy conversation about prohibiting kids from bringing their cell phones to school. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about, you know, how do we imagine today building policies that allow for what we don't know tomorrow? Because we didn't know then what we didn't know. So, Jon, as we go to you, I'm curious from your perspective. You've had a lot of experience in advocating policy. I'm just curious as you speak to think about that question for us.
Sure. Well, good morning, everybody. It's good to be here. I hate sitting in this deep chair. I want to jump out of it. I thought Richard was going to jump out of it for a second. I'm going to stand up. So, as you heard from my introduction, I've been doing policy in this space for 17 years. My second day as a lobbyist was the passage of the E-rate when it was attached to the Telecom Act of 1996. So that really dates me, I understand. And what's funny about that is as I was watching it happening, I had no idea that this is what I would be doing 17 years later. I would still be dealing with the E-rate program. And you know what? The E-rate program is fantastic. And I could stand up here and it is. A round of applause. Thank you, Bonnie, for the E-rate program.
There's a plant.
Seriously, I got to plant people in these audiences now to be nice to me. Because at the end of the day, I have to talk about the least sexy aspect of this, right? I mean, I'm not an educator. I'm not at the Department of Ed. I'm not working for a state government. I am here sort of working on essentially the plumbing, right, which is the infrastructure. That's what E-rate does. It pulls wires, it provides internet access discounts, provides telecom services discounts. It's a great program. But if you leave here having heard me and can remember only one thing, it's this. The E-rate program is running out of cash in a hurry. And one of the most important things at the federal level that has to happen, and this is an FCC issue, they have the power to change this. The most important thing is there needs to be more money put under the annual cap. I think this looks like a pretty sophisticated audience. You're all dressed up nice at least, so I'm assuming so. So you're probably familiar with the E-rate. But the E-rate, just for those who are uninitiated, has a $2.3 billion cap. That sounds like a lot of money. Think about the fact that that cap was established in 1998 and hasn't changed in 14 years. In fact, not only has that cap not changed in 14 years, but the basis of the cap was a McKinsey study that's older than the E-rate program. So it's probably 17 or 18 years old. That was before we had iPads, before there was a substantial wireless industry. So I was telling these folks on the phone in the prep session, it was probably around the time my father had a car phone that was attached to the car and was a cellular phone, and it was about this big in a huge box, and people were really impressed with that. So things have changed, but the E-rate program hasn't grown substantially in terms of finances. And I think people need to understand that. And one of the reasons that the E-rate program has to grow is because of all of the work that's going on in this room with wireless. The wireless BYOD stuff, bring your own device into school, the conversion from print to digital, even the coming online assessments, a lot of them are reliant on wireless. And that is where the growth in the program has been, and it's become costly. It's clearly something that needs to happen, but it costs a lot of money. And as a result, the priority one piece of E-rate is now at $2.44 billion. That's just the first piece, telecom and internet access, on top of a $2.3 billion cap. So it's about a wash. In Washington, by the way, that's about a wash. $100 million or so is about a wash. But the problem is the rest of the E-rate program, which does the pulling of the wires, the implementation of wired and wireless equipment, that stuff is declining because whatever's left over after priority 1 is what goes into priority 2. And there's almost no money left for priority 2. The FCC this year managed to go through the couch cushions and find another $1 billion. So it's a pretty big couch. But that may not happen again. And as a result, we could very well lose the opportunity to be pulling wires, doing wireless nodes, doing satellite in a lot of schools and libraries across the country. That's why we need more money under the program. We need to move beyond the number we set 14 years ago and get to a significantly higher number to meet the demand so that we can continue to do all the BYOD stuff, so that schools and libraries aren't forced to try to figure out how are they going to do it on their own. So that's my soapbox on this. I hope you guys will think about that issue as you think about all these other issues. Thanks.
So Jon has made his call to action for us very
Exactly.
clear. So let's take a second just to start out and sort of throw to the group this whole conversation about the policy at the different levels, at the district level, at the federal level, the state level. What are some of your thoughts about where do we establish that policy? Are there appropriate policies to establish at different levels? If you could wave your wand, what would you change tomorrow? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, if I go wave my wand, I certainly would like to have all the policies done at the local level. So that's the local perspective, because I think a lot of times these issues are even school by school based. We try not to make too many district decisions, or because the more you have classroom level decisions and school based level decisions and district level decisions, the more flexible you can be. Just as an example, one of the things, we talked about textbooks, and a lot of our textbooks we're trying to use, online textbooks, are flash based. Well, with BYOD, they don't run on the tools, iPads, except of course the kids have figured out if I use like Puffin, which is a browser off the iPad, I can make it all work. Well, guess what? Puffin bypasses all your filters, and so I have to say, you can do that at home, but I'm sorry you can't do that at school because otherwise I risk my E-rate funding and all this. Simple things like that, a technology that can solve a problem we have today. I'm restricted in using that. Of course, the ultimate solution is the publishers become and make their products device independent and very much more engaging rather than having to deal with PDFs, et cetera. But simple things, I found a solution. Kids actually found a solution. But I have to say, sorry, you can't do that. So there's the kind of things that I agree we have to really work on, teaching our kids to use technology in a responsible way, but having some of these restrictions and that are just, in some respects, arbitrary, keeps us from using and making even simple changes to our technology infrastructure that would solve some simple problems very easily, but we can't use them. So I think being able to have more local decisions and being able to have fewer bureaucratic policies would be great for us.
Richard, what's your thought about that?
Guess that was coming to me next. I can see that coming. Well, so first of all, really, truly, we agree. We agree that we need to have good decisions at the local level because Fairfax County looks very different than other parts of the country and other schools even here within Virginia. And so it's really important to make sure that solutions and approaches can be tailored to local districts and institutions. One thing that's important, though, and we have to think there is also a very important role when we can get groups together and transition and make sort of common goals. And that's one of the roles that I think is most important for the federal government. So everybody's interested in talking about funding, and we can talk about funding, and it's important to look at funding. But I think one of the really important roles that the federal government has is this ability to sort of convene and get people on the same page. One of the reasons that it's so challenging when, one of the reasons that we aren't as efficient with E-rate, for example, as we could be is because every little school district in the country is negotiating one off. Right? That's silly. That doesn't help us. When a big pharmaceutical company or a big, a national company goes out, they get this great deal because they're negotiating across the country, across the world with whoever their internet providers are. When you're a little school district somewhere, you can't do that. And so there are some examples where the federal government can be very helpful at saying, can we come with common approaches that helps drive that down? Let me give one real quick example of that. One of the things that we're focusing on, as you may know, is personalized learning. Right? It's part of what this Race to the Top district competition is for. Right? That's the plan. The $500 million are for technology and programs and support around personalized learning. One of the things that we realized is there just aren't really many good tools out there that provide guidance, personalized support for students. right? So we did something at the department. We said, we're going to bring all of these vendors together, sit them down at a table, and charge them that they need to build tools that can use students' data to help them make better decisions about going to college, about how their grades are, what their goals are. And we were able to bring all these folks together and say, you need to do this because this is a common national goal. And guess what? We had 15, 18 of the biggest companies that are providing ed tech come and say, we're doing it and we're in. And they showed prototypes the other day at the White House. Right? That's something that's very powerful that we can do. And then even districts that aren't going to participate in Race to the Top for whatever reason, they're still going to get the benefit of the fact that all these companies are building these tools. And so I think one of the important things that the federal government needs to do is, yes, make sure decisions about implementation are at the local level, but at the higher level say, how do we get people together around some common goals and really push and say, if we're coming together in a common way, you can't just negotiate with one little district here. This is a whole bunch of districts or programs, and you really got to be responsive. And they have to be responsive in ways that they may not if you have a district of a couple thousand students.
So, John, you talked about working with the different districts and their different perspectives and policy in your area, in your state, and there are multi-levels of views about where policy should be adopted, at the local level, and we can have very fierce conversations within a district. You ramp that up to the state level. What were some of the challenges that you faced with in terms of the identifying those policies?
Well, we do allow our districts to certainly adopt their own policies and make decisions locally. What we try to do as a state is kind of model best practices and put things into policy that encourage them to do the right thing, sort of. And so we do have some districts that in West Virginia, if a district isn't meeting adequate progress, or if there's a high dropout rate, something like that, then we have a number of districts that are state takeover. And so we work with those districts to try to implement policies and practices that are effective. And so we've tried in our policies to reflect that. And one of the things we do in West Virginia is model best practices, other districts that are effective, or districts nationwide that are really showing some improvement. And so we really try to look at that and bring those models in and show districts how they can be more effective and look to others.
So Richard talked a little bit about his definition of the digital divide, which may be different than how some of us may look at it. And I'm wondering, Maribeth and John, from your perspective, referring back to Richard's definition of this digital divide, not about transferring textbooks to digital form, but really reimagining what learning is and then allowing the technology to support that. From your perspectives, what does that look like?
I wholeheartedly agree. And I think even in district, we have 30,000 kids on free and reduced lunch, even though people think of Fairfax as a very high affluent area, which is in some respects is true, but we have a very diverse population from the very high to the very low. But even the kids on free and reduced lunch, we're finding about 95% have a device, whether it's a smartphone or some kind of access. That the digital divide is much more about the teachers and about staff development and about making sure that we have our flipped classrooms and embracing this technology. Because even though we have BYOD and we're pushing it, we still have a few, some classrooms that they have sort of like, but this is considered a red zone. Yeah, I know we allow devices, but in my classroom, put them away, put them in your backpacks. And so I think you're absolutely right. The digital divide is much more about the embracing the new way of learning and embracing the use of these technologies, the use of these mobile devices, much more than the actual device. We used to talk about 5-to-1, trying to get 5-to-1 computer ratios. I mean, that was years ago. Well, now it's 5-to-1, but it's 5 devices per kid, not 5 kids per device. And so they have a smartphone and a tablet and a laptop and whatever, and a gaming device, et cetera. So I think that rethinking how we're doing learning, really the idea of doing more project-based learning, and those project-based learning can be 24/7. We're a big user of Google Apps now, Google Apps for Education, in the wild garden with protection and all those kind of things. But being able to have kids work together, and they don't have to be in the same classroom. They can be across the county, across the world. Really rethinking that is really more the digital divide than the actual devices. Because I think most of our kids have found a way to get devices. Because even if you ask a group of kids in our Title I schools, and you say, how many of you all have a Facebook account? They all have them. They have found a way to get to the technology. That's not where the divide is.
Yeah, and before we go to John, you made me think about this capacity issue, where it has changed so much in how we view the number of devices per student, per professional. One of the things I've learned in my first few weeks at ISTE is when we go out to negotiate contracts for convention centers and hotels, they'll tell my colleagues, oh, we've got all the wireless you need. They say, no, you don't understand the people that are going to come to this event. So then all of a sudden you have this capacity issue, and of course our schools are facing the same thing. John, your thoughts about Richard's reference to digital divide?
Yeah, we have a lot of different economic issues in West Virginia. Same things that other folks face all across America, but one of our districts, McDowell County, is not only the poorest district in West Virginia, but the poorest in the nation. It leads the nation in all of the wrong categories. One of their issues is that there's not enough teachers in the county. This year, there are 89 students who are taking geometry through our West Virginia virtual school because there's not a geometry teacher in the county, no one certified. We recently went to a high school in that county to work with the students to make sure that they were getting off to a good start with the West Virginia virtual school. Many of them, it was the first time they'd taken a virtual course. And when we went into the school, the students, the first thing they had to do was complete a kind of an orientation on how to use the online resources. And we did it class by class. They came into a lab, and part of the tutorial that they had to complete involved a video. And so we were handing out headsets so they could complete the tutorial at their own pace. Many of the students didn't want the headphones, though. They pulled out their smartphones, jerked the earbuds out, and plugged those into the computers. And we thought, well, this is a poor community, but almost all of those students had smartphones that they utilized. And so we got them involved in using those. The school didn't currently have a BYOD policy, or they weren't quite ready for that, but we got the equipment in place so that they could utilize those devices in the school. And we also, the students were using them throughout the day. Some of the students had been typing their English papers with their thumbs. And so we made sure the students knew that they could use those to take notes if they wanted. They could use those devices to communicate with their teachers, with each other. And since almost all of the students had those, we made sure the students who didn't had devices that they could take home with them. Yeah. And so just the divide is there, and there are lots of issues that we face in West Virginia and across the nation. But there are lots of things we can do to kind of close that gap.
So I guess to all of you, if we have the crystal ball here, and you look out 5 years or so, X number of years, where do you see the future of digital learning? Where do you imagine it might be? Who wants to jump on that one? John.
So I won't look out 5. Let me just look out 2.
Okay.
2014. That is when online assessments are supposed to be delivered. We were talking about a digital divide and whether if it's the same thing or not. I would argue there's sort of multiple pieces to the digital divide right now which are going to impact the ability to deliver assessments in 2014. There's a study that came out earlier this year. I think it was the Center for Education Policy. I'm not quite sure. But it was a survey of states. I don't know if West Virginia participated in it. But they asked states, are you ready for online assessments in 2014? And the vast majority of states came back and said, no, we don't have enough computers to actually deliver the tests, or we don't have the right computers. We don't have enough bandwidth to make sure that a good chunk of our students can take the test at the same time. And there's one other interesting point here. We don't have enough technical support if something goes wrong. So the digital divide actually has many, many facets. I'm leaving out the professional development piece because you also have to have people who are trained in how to proctor these tests and do a little doctoring if something goes wrong. But the digital divide has multiple facets. It depends on where you are, but there are many, many states out there that are very worried about 2014 and whether we're going to have these great state-of-the-art online assessments that take advantage of adaptive curriculum, or we're going to go back to pen and pencil, which, by the way, is the fallback. So I think that we need to make sure that we get the right devices, the right amount of bandwidth, and enough support in the hands of people not only to take these tests, so that we can do all the other things. We shouldn't just be buying devices for a test. We should be buying devices that our kids can use throughout. On a personal note, I live in Fairfax County as well. Apparently we all do. except for John. And I have a fourth grader, and at parent-teacher night, back-to-school night, they announced that my fourth grader really ought to have a laptop. And I thought to myself, she just forgot her sweatshirt. I'm going to give her a $1,200 device? But you know what? They were darn serious about this. And people, including not my kid, but other people's kids, are coming into school now with laptops. And maybe I'll go so far as to let her bring the iPad in. But it's getting down to that level now, as probably a lot of you know, where it used to be that elementary school was, well, that was sort of, we're just starting there. It's full on now. And I think people need to recognize that as lucky as we are in Fairfax County to live in an affluent area where a lot of people can afford devices, where the bandwidth is mostly excellent, and there's good technical support and leadership from Maribeth, not everyone is so fortunate. We need to make sure that those parts of the country that don't have the computers, that don't have the bandwidth, and that can't afford to buy them, that they have enough resources at their disposal so they can be on an equal footing with everybody else.
So Richard, what's your crystal ball telling you?
So my crystal, I was just checking because I think, isn't there an app for that where you can just look and see 6 years in the future, it'll tell you everything? So I didn't find it. It might just not be installed on my device. So realizing I don't have that, let me just try to go from my brain here. When I think about 5 years in the future, I'm really, really excited by what I see because I think what we're going to be in is a world where we really have personalized learning working for students across the country. I was talking to a principal the other day and talking about his goal. This is a phenomenal principal that I know that's working on already this transition to personalized learning. He said, we need every kid to have an IEP. Every one of them needs to have an individualized education plan. And technology enables us to do that at scale. That's the problem. Everybody agrees that an IEP would be great, but when you don't have technology and supports to do that, it becomes very difficult, nearly impossible. As a high school teacher, former high school teacher, right, I had that, 6 periods a day times 30 kids. It's near impossible to do. But we're going to have tools and supports in order to make allow every kid to have a personalized learning experience, which is exciting. But here's the cool part about the crystal ball in 5 years. When we look back, we're going to see that how we got there was because of some incredibly creative decisions by people in this room, and other people that are working on this problem. So for example, I was talking to a school district the other day where they'd transitioned to giving a device for every kid. The way they did it, they got rid of copiers and paper and toner. I said, come on, that's really how you paid for this? And they said, you have no idea, this is the superintendent, you have no idea how much money we spend on copiers, paper, and toner. We paid for this right? And other creative things as well. And so, but the point is, we are going to get there, but it's going to be because of really creative decisions and really rethinking things, not simply trying to infuse more technology and devices into the current system. And I think we'll all be really proud of that when we look back and see how we got there.
I just flashed on my Smith Corona typewriter from college where I had that eraser cartridge, and you could go back and type over those letters. Yeah, my kids think that's a fairy tale. Maribeth, your crystal ball.
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly agree. Individualized learning and being able to have not just what's an IEP for each kid, but each kid would have access to the best and brightest of teachers, whether they're teachers or learning modules, et cetera, so that just because you happen to live in an affluent or a non-affluent area, you still have access to the absolute top-notch education, and the technology can certainly make that happen. So I would certainly agree with what everyone else has said. So,
John, your crystal ball?
I don't know if anyone saw the recent issue of Entertainment Weekly, but there was an ad in that magazine that actually included it had a real smartphone in the ad. It was an ad when you open it up, kind of like the greeting cards that when you open them, they start playing. This ad started playing a video for a TV channel. But somebody I saw online had taken the device out of the magazine and discovered it was a really cheap Chinese-made cell phone, and you could actually press the buttons and dial a number. And so the technology is getting cheaper, and as technology continues to get cheaper, hopefully it'll get to the point that devices like that will be proliferous. They'll be everywhere. All students will have multiple devices of their own. We'll be able to buy them the devices, but we really need to get to a point where we can have platforms, not just for testing, but for the content, where students can access their content, their coursework from anywhere, from any device, and they'll have multiple devices that throughout the day, whether they're at school on a computer or they have this device they carry with them, that they'll be able to access that content. And the content's getting better too. Last year in West Virginia, we did an RFI, a request for information, where we told companies what we want. We wanted a personalized learning landscape where students can log on to this and see where they are and meeting the requirements for this class they're taking or the course they're taking, their graduation, where parents could log on from a computer to a web browser and see how their students are doing, and teachers could quickly look at one place and see how the students are doing as far as discipline, attendance, and all of the different platforms that students access. It could all be done in this one area. And when we did that RFI last year, no company had that. No one had all of the different things we wanted. It's getting closer now, and so companies are creating these great new tools that as devices get cheaper and more things can be utilized on them, I think we'll eventually get to the point, hopefully within 5 years, where students have access to these great tools, multiple devices, and they're affordable.
Yeah. So do we have some questions? Yes, we have a question over here. A mic is headed your way.
I'm pleased to meet you, sir. I'm your ISTE Communications for Digital Divide. I live in Washington, D.C., and I worked in Arlington, and I work in Fairfax. And you know, it's so sad. It's like the plantation. We don't have in D.C. what there is in the other places. And I write and I blog about these things. And people talk to me. And I know Edith Caperton is doing wonderful things in West Virginia, trying to do stuff. But who's talking to the people on the other side of the digital divide except ISTE? ISTE can't carry the whole thing along. And John knew my name because I've been talking about this before he started. It's my mission. What can we do to bring those people who are only reading about it into the talk about the digital divide? Thank you.
John.
So I think that's a great question. So there are definitely things you can do, and some of it's being done right now, but not at scale. I know this is a wireless conference, so forgive me for mentioning cable, but I have to. Comcast, as part of their merger agreement, as a condition of their merger agreement, has launched an Internet Essentials program, which is providing discounted broadband for 2 years to low-income students, as well as, I think it's a voucher for a low-cost device and digital, sort of digital citizenship training. Following on that, all the cable companies that weren't involved in the merger, there's about, I don't know, 10 of those, are doing essentially the same thing. And those are great public-private partnership opportunities. These are companies that are getting into untapped markets, so it's attractive for them, giving discounts on broadband, getting them into the homes of the low-income students who wouldn't ordinarily have them, getting them some devices, and getting them some training. That's a start, but it shouldn't be the end. Because the problem is that once the 2 years are up, the question is, do those broadband costs, which are $9.95, shoot up to what the rest of us are all paying? And if so, is that going to force those low-income families to pull the plug? So I think, one, we need to make sure that these kinds of discounts are available not just for 2 years, but for longer. And, you know, not to bite the hand that's giving me a microphone, I think that the other industries, the other telco industries need to look at doing this. I think the wireless industry, I think the wireline industries, all ought to be looking at what cable is doing and saying, you know what, we should be doing that too. Because there are large chunks of this country, not just DC, that simply are on the wrong side of the digital divide, which I think still exists. And I guess Bonnie would agree.
Yeah. Other thoughts on this?
Let me add one other thing. And first of all, even before adding that, let me just say thank you to you for doing that, because part of the reason we address this stuff is when we have people that are blogging and talking about this and saying, we got problems here, and helping point them out. And so thank you very much. Let me mention one other thing. I agree completely with John, and I was going to mention that the larger program, by the way, is called Connect to Compete. So if you aren't familiar with it, make sure you go and look at Connect to Compete and take advantage of that. There's another interesting challenge and something that's very simple that you can do about that, which is when we go out and look and see where in schools we have connectivity problems, we don't know. And the reason we don't know is because even though we can look on the broadband map and see where there is broadband to the door of the school, that's very different from what the kid in the classroom or the teacher in the classroom is experiencing. And we may be in a place where you're getting broadband to the door of that school, but in the classroom you can't load a web page. And we don't have that data right now. And so it's hard to tackle and address those issues. So there's something that you can do right now, and I want to make sure everybody knows about this in case I get hit by a bus on the way out, that you'll know about it. There is a new organization called educationsuperhighway.org, and you may have, I see some people nodding, I hope you've heard about this, and what they're doing is they have a little speed test that you can run. Anybody can go in your school and just click, go to educationsuperhighway.org, click on the little speed test, and it will help take that data, the bandwidth that you have, and it will help us be able to figure out where there are bandwidth problems. And then from there, it's easier to go and address and say, hey, look, we got schools, even though they're in areas that supposedly have great bandwidth to the door, but in the classrooms they don't have them. And there are a whole bunch of things that we can do to fix that. There are solutions, but those solutions can only come in place if we know where the problems are, right? So there's some things that we can do, for example, and by the way, let me mention one other piece that goes along with this. The FCC just 2 days ago, at the same White House event I mentioned before, announced that they are opening up, they're making public the E-rate purchasing information from the files that people fill out when they get their E-rate amounts, right? So the money for that, which seems like a kind of nerdy, wonky thing, but let me explain what that means. What it means is you can go and look at the school next door to you and say, wow, I'm paying 3 times the cost for my broadband that they are, because that information is transparent. And then that brings up a nice little conversation that you have when you call your internet provider and say, interesting what we're seeing here, right? But that sort of thing. So those two things, helping make sure we know what the real bandwidth is in the classrooms by going to educationsuperhighway.org, and also taking advantage of the new transparency from the FCC on the E-rate to make sure you really are getting the lowest amount for broadband. That's what the law says, that you're actually getting that will make a huge difference in trying to catch some of these districts and some of these areas here that may be disadvantaged.
Super. Other questions?
Yeah. Hey, Brian. Keith Kruger from COSN. Congratulations.
Yep. Hey,
Great
Keith.
panel on policy. And one thing I just wanted to comment on, it's not a question, but as we think about policy, the question that we've had is what should school boards or legislatures do or not do? And it's great to have this audience of people who are really believers. But what's really important from my perspective is, how do we get the School Boards Association, the State School Boards Association, the elementary, secondary school principals, the teachers' unions, is there any advice that they could give to policy-making boards? And so last December, COSN convened with the help of the MacArthur Foundation 20 associations. And actually we asked, is there any consensus around policies around mobile and policies around social media? And there actually was consensus, and it's called Making Progress. They've actually signed off. So if you want to have these discussions with your school board, you can say this is what everybody has agreed to. First of all, banning is not the answer. Secondly, educate students on responsible use. Third, emphasize professional development for your staff on safe and effective use. And finally, rethink your acceptable use policies. So I just wanted to add that because I think sometimes we act as though we talk to each other. So.
Sure. Thanks, Keith. Question over here.
Ann Flynn, National School Boards Association. Hi, Keith. Our constituency is obviously quite interested in advancing the technology use in this country, but something, I guess this question is most directed to Jon, because E-rate has been around, as you said, for a lot of years, and I think it's been difficult to create a sense of urgency and a need to change something. There's a bit of apathy out there, and so how do we get the broader constituency base to take the kind of action to advocate effectively for E-rate when I think there's so many other issues, virtual learning, public-private debates about for-profit providers, and all sorts of other things distracting educators. How do we get them refocused on the need to support E-rate?
Thanks, Ann.
Well, I think that they're going to refocus on E-rate whatever we do because they're going to start feeling the pinch. There's certainly going to be less E-rate money to go around. I think as I mentioned at the top, we sort of dodged a bullet this year because they found an additional $1 billion. Next year we may not be so lucky, and folks may begin to realize that not only are they losing their priority 2, but if priority 1 continues to grow at the rate that it's growing, which is literally exploding, and a lot of it because of wireless, you're going to start seeing that prorated. So people are going to have to pay more. So one, they're going to feel the pinch. Two, there's no question that there has not been enough focus on the E-rate. I have to confess that I have been a little bit like Cassandra here, crying that we are going to end up losing this program or having it seriously limited if we don't do something. And I think that we're finally reaching the point where other people are listening. And it needs to happen. It needs to bubble up from the bottom. There definitely needs to be people telling their stories, talking about the great things E-rate does, getting out there and emailing the FCC, emailing their members of Congress, emailing the Senate, because this is a finite and precious resource that's going away. But I also think it needs to come from the top. There needs to be leadership from the top and a recognition that there are serious structural issues with the finances of the E-rate program that need to get addressed, or you're going to start seeing a real downturn in its ability to finance what needs to get financed, including the wireless industry. So, you know, I don't know how to motivate people across the country how to do this, but I think when they start running out of money, that will be self-motivating.
Thanks, John. Other questions? Over here.
Yeah, Dean Hyman from from BrainPop. I want to salute the panel. I think that the work that's being done is amazing. And I think it's critical for mobile learning that all of these things be in place. The policies, the funding, the local broadband needs, and so on and so forth. But one of the places where we get stuck, and one of the places where it's hard to get teachers and parents to actually be supportive of mobile learning or any other kind of learning, is if we can't actually describe what it's going to look like, how this is actually going to change their kids' experience and learning trajectory. And I'm just wondering, I mean, I know there are some pilots out there and there are some programs, we hear about them at these conferences. They're usually abroad, they're usually tiny. I'm just wondering, what would you like to see from the industry, the ones who are making the tools, the content, the actual learning experiences that might help move teachers and parents to be supportive of this too? With all, you know, I mean, what NSBA and COSIN and ISTE and the Department of Education is doing is great, but it's not enough ultimately, I think.
Thank you.
So can I just make a comment on that? First of all, let me say thank you. On behalf of my kids, thank you for the tools that you're providing, because they will be very excited, probably more excited to know that I talked to somebody from BrainPop here today than anything else that I've done in the day. But I will tell you a couple things that are important. One is we have to do a better job of getting data in the hands of parents. And teachers and students, by the way, but to answer your question, in the hands of parents. We talk about, in the grants that we have written out, in Race to the Top District, for example, and other grants, you'll see that we talk about near real-time data. It is too late when I find out a week later that my kid isn't doing well on a particular topic, right? That's the idea, this whole idea of summative assessment. We got to do it. We got to know where people are at so we know how to target and help fix schools when there are problems. But at that point, the only thing that information does is make me feel bad, because there's nothing I can do at that point to shape. So we've got to do a better job of formative assessment. And that's where you come in, and people like you that are building tools, because you can help get targeted near real-time data about how a kid is performing in the hands of parents quickly. And then the one other thing that I would mention is, and this is shifting a little bit from what your original question was, but I think gets at the point, which is we have to do a better job of teaching parents. So I was talking to a principal the other day, and I was at a school, and I said, doing phenomenal things with technology in the building. I said, what have you been doing to help support parents? What have you been doing to teach your parents how they can be using technology better at home? So we just figured they'll figure it out. Really? Have you sat and watched have you asked parents if they could list off tools like yours and others that you know, are helpful for teaching kids math and reading and that sort of stuff? No, they can't do that. They're busy doing other really important things. And so one of the great things that we can do as schools, those of you that are working in schools, is help teach your parents. Say, here's some great apps that you could be doing instead of Angry Birds with your kids that they will like, that will help teach math. And because you're going to help make sure there's near real-time data, the parents start to see, hey, my kid's learning. That's awesome. And as a parent, we feel really cool about that. So guess what we do? We help encourage it even more, and we become involved. And so please help use data to empower parents. In schools, please help teach parents how they can be using technology with their kids at home.
John.
Longitudinal research. That's what we need. And we need good longitudinal research to influence policymaking. That's one. The second piece is, I think ed tech in general could use a bit of a PR campaign. For those of you who have not been following the stories written by the New York Times and a few other publications that have taken serious whacks at every part of the ed tech industry about its value, about its costliness, about whether or not it's effective. That message is not getting through to the public when those kinds of articles are published. I think that this industry needs to invest in some serious public relations efforts to show the good stories that are out there, the kinds of things, the Mooresvilles, the Fairfax counties, the Onslows, all of those districts that are doing tremendous things with technology, and talk about where there's still a lack, where there are still places that don't have the technology and how we're not there yet. One of the big problems I face with the E-rate program all the time is, well, we've put $33 billion into infrastructure. Aren't we done now? We're not done. We're not done because there are new devices being invented as we're sitting here that our kids are going to have in their hands, maybe not by this Christmas, but probably by next. So these are the kinds of things that are going to drive learning and are going to drive the interest of kids, and we need to make sure that people value these things and that they see them as learning tools and not entertainment tools and not simply things that my kids are getting on Facebook or texting with. These are actual, real educational tools that make a difference. We need to show that through the research, and then we need to take a giant whack at a PR campaign here to show people these are the good stories, this is what it can do.
Thank you, John. Do we have one more question?
Great. Yeah, my name is Jeff Mead from the Smithsonian Ed Lab, and I actually want to follow up on the answers that you two gentlemen have just given. We've spent the last couple of days talking about the opportunities for personalized learning. And my question is, can we use some of these success stories to get ourselves thinking about what do personalized outcomes look like? And can you maybe articulate how effective personalized learning has affected the approach to working with curriculum standards and standardized tests?
Who wants to jump on that one?
I'm not sure I totally understand. So can we clarify a little bit? So how is personalizing learning affecting the development of standards?
Yeah, so what we've got is some really effective examples of what personalized learning looks like with some of the mobile tools.
Yeah.
Are we still testing based on curriculum standards, though, and is there going to be an
sure.
emphasis on connecting personalized learning with personalized outcomes?
Yeah. Okay, so I think the answer is absolutely, right? So just because we're talking about personalized learning doesn't mean we throw standards out. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Because we have standards, it enables personalized learning. Here's the thing. In the past, we've done what we call, and sorry, I don't know any other way to say this, we do what's called the butts and seats model, which says, if you successfully breathe in this class for this amount of time, we move you from this class to this class, right? Because we have standards, we can now say, as we're doing things like using technology and tools to align and test mastery, right? Seeing, can you perform this skill? Are you able to show competency here? We can then move along or slow somebody down if they need a little more time based on how they're performing against a standard. And so what's really exciting about having good standards, and you know, there's all the Common Core standards that are happening, but even college and career-ready standards at the state level are allowing us to help align what students are doing to this individual, you know, to their performance as they progress. And so to kind of wrap it up, my point would be what we have done in the past is we have said every student, you know, we sort of hold the schedule constant, right? And we put more emphasis on holding the schedule constant and we allow the learning to vary. What we need to do is flip that, and we need to say every student needs to hit mastery all the time, even if that means allowing the schedule to vary a little bit, right? Allowing some kids to take longer and some kids another. And by the way, it's going to be in different things. So if a kid's having struggling in one particular area, doesn't mean that they're not going to be advanced or ahead in another place, right? The ability to adapt and adjust to the kid's learning needs, that all happens because we have good standards that we can align to, and great formative assessment, by the way.
I'd just like to add to that if you truly have personalized learning, you could really do away with grade levels. You could have students that progress at their own pace, and they move ahead when they reach the standards.
Yep.
Okay,
Brian, I
so
think we have time for one more if you get a chance.
let's do it. We have a minute and 35 seconds.
Okay, I'll speak quickly. Hi, I'm Brian Oliver Smith with Urban Planet Mobile, and we work mostly in international markets. We work heavily on trying to move learning from a place to a process. So we work with a lot of the international mobile operators. So we find that a lot of the innovation and the leadership is not coming out of the governments that we're working with in Indonesia or in even Saudi Arabia and other places. They're coming from the mobile operators. So what I'd like to ask is, how do we bridge the other digital divide, which is the digital divide of Qualcomm is here, and I really applaud them for setting this up, but Android is going to crank out about 1 billion devices this year, and Apple is one of the most coveted in the world, and I don't see them engaged in this conversation. How do we draw them in so we stop having the digital divide in that sense and bring them heavier into education to cause this transformation?
John?
So I think actually that, and I don't know if you're in this town or not, but I've been here a while, and industry is involved. There's no question about it. Traditionally, I sit around a table. There's a lot of fellow board members here of a group called the National Coalition for Technology and Education and Training, where we put on events that sort of spotlight the kinds of things I've been talking about, which is great education technology. Around that table are education associations, are foundations, but also industry. Apple's at that table, Pearson's at that table. There's probably others I'm leaving out, McGraw-Hill. You know, there are plenty of people, and they play, and they're involved in policymaking. But, you know, I think it has to be more than that. It has to come from more than just industry and from education. There actually has to be some leadership from the government here. Because what we're talking about, for the most part, at least what I've been talking about, are government programs and government financing, and there has to be a recognition from government that these things are important, that they need to be addressed. And I do think that industry is very involved here, and a lot of them are very concerned about this space. It's a big chunk of their markets.
Thank you. And with that, I want to thank all of you for your participation and really thank our panelists so much for being here today.